Bill touched many lives, and it's obviously hard, therefore, to feature every voice and every friend and every ally and every colleague. But please feel free to use the chat to copy paste images or comments, and we will capture the chat too. I think that's quite important. So please do use that as a tool for sharing any of your own thoughts. And even if you've spoken and something comes to mind that you'd like to add afterward, if you run out of time on what it is you've prepared to speak about, you can use the chat for the capture, and we'll collate all of that information and share it with all of you after the event. Okay, 6 p.m. start. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dean Harris. Thank you all for coming to this incredibly special event. And you know, what characterizes a special event? Well, in my view, it's when we're convened in this way, when so many people have chosen to attend this evening, no doubt after a long day on Zoom, if they're academics, to still offer even more time to Zoom, to recognize somebody incredibly important to many of us. And I'd like to see it as not an opportunity to mourn a loss, because I'm sure there's time for that, and there's a more appropriate events perhaps than a Zoomiverse for real mourning to take place, but actually a chance for us to really celebrate life and to recognize somebody who was highly regarded but also very loved at Pratt. And I can't say School of Architecture, because Bill was not only a visionary architect, he was also somebody, and obviously which is why the School of Architecture likes to claim him as their own, but he was a true polymath, which means he had relationships everywhere. He flirted with other forms of expression, whether that's furniture or product. So he was basically married to us, but he was dating School of Design. So we have a number of School of Design speakers, including Dean Nita Cooney here this evening too, who worked closely with him. And of course, I didn't really have the privilege of being his dean in a meaningful sense. I've only been here just over a year, and COVID's obviously been quite disruptive in that regard. But I have, and tribute to Farzam at this point too, and the many collaborators, including Anita, convened a really quite astonishing collective of many close associates, former students, faculty, collaborators, and fellow A-seats, furniture designers and friends who will offer a tribute to Bill, this remarkable man whose liquid architecture will flow long after his lifespan did. So I'd like to start by introducing our esteemed president, Francis Burnett, to offer a few words of condolence. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. I am assuming I am on. Sorry.
You are on, and you are perfectly clear.
Okay, there you go. I'm so pleased to see you all here tonight, and it's so important to take these moments to pause and, as Harriet just mentioned, celebrate such an extraordinary and valued member of our community. Of course, there's sadness and unbelievable appreciation. We come together to remember a treasured educator, a visionary architect and designer, and a Pratt alum, Bill Katavolos. And a valued member of Bill certainly was. He studied at Pratt before leaving to serve the US as a US Air Corps sergeant during World War II. He then returned to teach in Pratt's industrial design department in the 50s and 60s before becoming an integral part of Pratt's undergraduate architecture faculty in '73, and eventually receiving tenure in the early 80s. And throughout that tenure, Bill was deeply invested in the potential for great change in architecture through organic materials and engineering. And I had the great fortune of spending time with Bill as he challenged my own engineering background with his excitement for new ways of investigating structures. And when I visited his lab and he visited the Pratt House, not equivalent, I will say, a momentary query became hour-long discussions. And I cannot tell you how much his words resonate now. They were unbelievably profound, loaded with wisdom. And in the mid-'70s, he built the first mock-up of hydronic architecture, a pioneering work in the field. And some of Bill's most recent work included new drawings for an autonomous house, which could grow its own food. He was absolutely prescient. This forward-thinking approach to architecture and teaching, and his continued appreciation of the world and the wonder of exploration, impacted so many cohorts of Pratt students and hosts of colleagues. Many of you are here. He welcomed interdisciplinary learning and creativity through his expansive career. He crossed fields, math, physics, nanotechnology, organicism, and classicism. And in 2000, he co-founded the Center for Experimental Structures, CES, with Haresh Lavani. And with Bill and Haresh's oversight, and over the years, students in the center designed structures that are definitely amongst the first in the world. Bill retired from his full-time position in 2008, and though he continued to teach as a visiting professor. And in early November last year, I had the great honor of awarding Bill with a Lifetime Achievement Award as part of Pratt's Alumni Achievement Awards event. At that time, I noted that his work as a thought leader spanning disciplines, including industrial design and architecture, with his manifesto, Organics, having become the basis for chemical architecture, and his work included in the collections of MoMA and the Louvre. Among many other ways, this award symbolized for me and for others Bill's dedication to higher education, to broad and far-reaching thinking, and the perpetual curiosity that defines a scholarly mind, total immersion in the keen exploration of ideas, the implementation of those experiments. We will indeed miss his presence. And Bill, your intellect, your joy around new ways of thinking reside in all of us always, and for that, we are all grateful.
Thank you, Frances. That's wonderful. I believe Bruce Gitlin is here. I just wanted to check though. He may be on a phone. Are you, Bruce? Just wanted to check with you. If not, we can come back later just in case. And I've been scanning through the attendees, but I don't think so. Maybe not. So, Dina Nitakuni, would you like to say a few words, please? Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. And thank you for joining us tonight to remember an extraordinary member of our community. Bill was an unforgettable figure. He had an irrepressible energy and optimism that was contagious. You might meet him only once, and it's likely you would remember that encounter. He was a masterful storyteller who would take you on a wild ride. You might question the twists and turns, think to yourself, where is he going? But as the end approached, or maybe just a pause in the conversation, you realized that there was something to this adventure, an original gem of an insight that you would remember and replay. He was also a master of the takeaway sentence that captured the essence of any situation. When I moved from the School of Architecture to chair the interior design department at Pratt, Bill congratulated me as if I had made some very wise chess move that was good for me and good for Pratt. Over the years, we would talk, and I knew that in his way, he was watching what I was up to, something of a proactive guardian angel. As early as I can remember, I watched the adults assessing how they looked at life and how they aged. Early on, I decided that to be always curious, living fully in the present, but with the easy ability to recall the lessons and stories of one's own history was the wise and happy way to live. Bill was and still does serve that role model for how to get on with it all. I can still hear his voice, still conjure the glint in his eye when he said hello. I will miss him. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. That was lovely. Professor Lavani, one of those closest collaborators, are you able to join us with a few words?
Thank you. When the great physicist Richard Feynman passed away, he was described as a magical genius by a mathematician, and suggesting that there's another class called the ordinary geniuses. And Bill, with the kind of self-awareness he had, he identified with magical geniuses like Murray Gell-Mann and Bucky Fuller, and to my great surprise, the mathematician Ramanujan, because when I mentioned to him I was reading a book about Ramanujan, the man who knew infinity, Bill at once said, "That's my kind of man." And I think that comment was very revealing, because it showed that what is well known about this mathematician is that equations and number patterns and things, they kind of live streamed into him in like a dreamlike state. And Bill was exactly like that. It seems to me that ideas came to him, ideas about design, form, and number, his three great things. They all kind of came to him as a vehicle through which nature was speaking to us. I think he was very well aware of that. And the thing about magical geniuses is we don't know how they come up with their ideas. And the simplest example I can think of is the air that we breathe, and that's all around us. Bill, I think, was the only one who put it to work in his water house, meaning that it was air pressure with a little bit of help from vacuum that was raising water up through the walls between two sheets of plastic. And the magic there, that was the first magic. The second magic there was when the walls are rising, they would join up on the roof. So then Bill had created, by that simple demonstration outside of Higgins, in fact, in 1975, he had created a void, a habitable space inside a continuous mass of water. I think that's one of his great inventions. And he spent the next 40 years perfecting that and extending it and so on. Same thing for particle physics. And I think Bill, I remember he mentioned about this water thing, that the air atmospheric pressure would be able to raise water up to 3 floors, startling, 33 feet high, which is in fact the correct number. And I think it'll be a great project for the Mythbusters. They've got to prove it, and it might work. I think so. Bill knew what he was doing. I'll just close, since we are short of time, draw an analogy, since he was into physics, analogy with 2 familiar objects in the sky, stars and planets. They both shine, but the difference is the stars make their own light, while planets live in reflected light. And Bill created his own light. It came from within him. And what it did was it made others shine brighter. That was his great gift. And so the starlight is meant for everyone, but human light it's a special, it's like to whom it may concern light. It only matters those who came in contact with him. And I think his light will continue. And I think his work, like him, will continue to inspire joy, wonder, and a great hope for a future he kept inventing and redesigning. It was a great privilege to know him and to share the same space and same time with him. I think he was nature's very special gift to us, and I'll miss him, of course.
Yeah, thank you so much, Harash. Can't imagine how hard this is, actually. I'm very pleased to say that I believe Bruce Gitlin has just arrived. And I wonder if Bruce would like to say a few words, if it's not too soon to parachute you in. Or maybe still battling microphones, in which case, Bruce, Hannah.
Oh, he's on mute.
Oh, okay. One moment. I do apologize.
Okay.
Bruce Gitlin, hello.
Sorry, I had trouble getting on. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. We're welcome. It's lovely to see you.
About Bill. You know, there are many adjectives I could use to try and communicate what kind of person Bill was. Unique, interesting, intelligent, creative, caring, and special come to mind. I first met Bill on a plane about 20 years ago. And I remember it that he was absolutely mesmerizing. He told me he was teaching at Pratt. So when I got back, I spoke to my friend John Lobel, who was on and it was at Pratt. And I asked if he knew him and if he could bring him over to my factory for a chat and a visit. So when Bill came over, he handed me a wooden object that seems to have been sliced in dozens of directions. When I put it down on my desk, it fell apart into many pieces. I had very little idea of what he was doing, something that continued throughout our relationship, until he explained it to me. And he asked me to please put the object back together. It was like a jigsaw puzzle in 3D. I guess I put it together fast enough for him because he said, "Okay, now we can talk." He explained that he gave this puzzle to students at the beginning of each semester. Bill started explaining to me that he was working on an idea to create structures out of water that could be habitable, off-grid, sustainable, and movable. I had very little understanding about what and how he was saying. This happened quite often to me and many others that talked to Bill, because his thinking was so advanced. Bill had me come over to the Center for Experimental Structures that he and Haresh had started. He showed me drawings and partially built mock-ups of what he was doing. He explained it in detail in his way. What an eye-opener. I was fortunate to work with him on this project, helping to design and fabricate some parts in metal, but it was a treat to see how Bill's mind worked. When I hosted one of the very first TEDx conferences, and I did it at Pratt, of course, I had to have Bill speak. I think that what he said was very much over the top of many people's head. Interesting it was. He didn't finish many of his sentences because I think he knew what he was saying, even though it was hard for others to follow. Bill was given Pratt's Alumni Lifetime Achievement Award, which he deserved for all his accomplishments. You will probably hear about some of these later. Brilliant students and faculty flocked to Bill because he was so exceptional and inspirational. Many of those he inspired helped to care for him and are here to honor his memory tonight. It is a wonderful tribute to Bill and his life.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And now I'd like to introduce another Bruce, who I believe is an alumnus and was Professor of Industrial Design at Pratt, Bruce Hanna. So over to you, Bruce number 2.
How's that?
We can hear you perfectly clearly.
Okay. Bill Katavolos, A Life Well Lived. I always sent lots of students to Bill's class, Design Futures. They would come back saying, was I hallucinating? And I'd say, yes. There is a drug that comes out of Bill when you're around him that allows you to hallucinate things you could never possibly have seen before. I think that was part of Bill's secret. He was a secret mushroom. Whenever you came around him, something good would happen. Born on Pi Day, 3/14/24, predestined to live a life investigating the numbers and mysteries of Fibonacci, Euclid, the Parthenon, the Pantheon, the pyramids, Santa Sophia. The secrets will be revealed in form and space. Everything is a T in the T chair, the legs, the seat, even the screws. Poor Tatiana. Bill loved the poetry in the numbers and the forms, the way they came together to create something we all see as beauty, but can't explain. But maybe we can if we understand the poetry of numbers. It's as simple as X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3. Permutations and combinations, faces, ends, sides, and edges, and that's just rectangles of the golden mean variety, relating in primary, contrasting, and complementary colors as simple or as complex as you could imagine, as forms swirled from E's to T's to I's, impossible numbers of relationship appeared before our eyes as Bill discoursed on simultaneously contrasting forms and mass-produced one of a kind. And drew with both hands, we struggled to understand the beauty he made and taught, arrived at by numbers. And then there's organic architecture in the 1960s, Bill discoursing on genetics and growing forms by messing with the DNA of materials. Beautiful forms evolving before our eyes, maybe floating on that precious resource, water. Or maybe it is water that creates those forms to live and work in and farm. So many visions, so many thoughts. Maybe that's why Bill's a visionary, a dreamer. He stumbled into class an hour or so late, Wild Bill we called him, arousing us from our naps on our desks with the news of container ships and other trips, proclamations that changed our lives, that made us want to be designers. And then to Eric's on DeKalb, the class resumed over beer as Bill churned out ideas and thoughts that we absorbed, trying to understand. What was Bill saying? Design can change the world, he explained, as X, Y, Z, and 1, 2, 3 became our abstraction and distraction as we tried to understand and comprehend and dream, and maybe we might just rise to that lofty height to change the world by design. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bruce. That was lovely. I'd also like to now invite another industrial designer, Karen Stone, to share a few memories of her. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. And so I was one of the students that Bruce made sure I was in the architectural futures class in graduate school about 35 years ago. So thank you, Bruce, for making me take the class. And for me, it was the sincerity of his voice when describing those crazy complex relationships of the Parthenon and comparing it to the human body that made it so completely convincing. And then these days when I'm teaching my students in my 3D class, I think of Bill with his students, and it was that dreamy way, that dreamy, relaxed way that he had that would make you feel so comfortable, even though you were probably really confused, not sure what he was talking about. But he would often stop in my classroom, and it was his passion and the excitement in his voice that left that big impression. And I guess Bill was the originator of that phrase, dream with ambition. And Kamala Harris used that the other night. So I remember that was probably Bill that gave her some message to have her use that. Working away on big ideas was, of course, Bill's love, and the genius was that he would break it all down so we could understand it, or at least pretend to understand it. He would weave famous names into his stories, and one of those stories I heard about often was when he had showed Florence Knoll his chair. So I was so happy when hosting events at the Knoll showroom here, Bill would feel right at home. So my really quick story, last year we had the RRK event at Knoll, and he spent the time reconnecting with friends who swarmed him like a rock star. At the end of the night, a few of you remember, I needed to get him back to Brooklyn. So I hailed a car, and we'd only gotten a few blocks when Bill asked me if I could find a street vendor. So I'm like, oh my gosh, he wanted a hot dog. So thankfully I found the hot dog stand just before we hit the FDR. A quintessential New Yorker, that night would not have been complete unless he had gotten that hot dog and with lots of ketchup. I have the picture here of Bill in the car with the hot dogs. Actually, he had two. So Bill, of course, had an eye for seeing the best in people and for the people that did their best. I want to thank, as Bill would say, his posse for doing the best for him. And just a personal note to Francis, would want you to have flowers every week in your office. Bill's wife, Trania, was his #1. So a personal thank you from me to Gail Great-Hannah, who's with us, for introducing me to Trania, and frankly to Pratt. Trania had that creative curiosity, and it was a great storyteller, just like Bill. So you all, I have this idea that Bill, this otherworldly ways of looking at things, he had friends on every level. And I feel in some otherworldly way, he's always going to be watching us to be sure we're working hard, inspiring us, encouraging us, provoking us from above, keeping us curious and thinking and on our toes. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. It's really lovely. I'd like to invite Christopher Arabadjes. He's, I believe, the Director of Visual Multimedia Resources at Pratt. Had to look you up and find out your title. You get this really long introduction.
It's nice to meet you. We haven't met before, but I've
yeah, I know.
So many
Welcome.
times. You can hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly clearly. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to read this because I think I won't get through it if I don't. So I want to say, oh my goodness.
Oh, Chris.
It's okay.
It's okay, Chris. Take a moment if you need to.
Bruce started it. It's Bruce's fault.
Okay. I feel a bit humbled to be included here among among a rather esteemed list of speakers. Though we started out as colleagues 20 years ago, working on big idea projects like reworking particle physics and investigating a number system underlying the design of the Parthenon, I got to know Bill a bit more intimately as his health began its slow decline. I'm sorry. In all those ways, a son or a daughter would care for an aging parent who held on to their independence for dear life. Through all those indignities, we all suffer if we're fortunate enough to live a long enough life like Bill. Even though it must have been very frustrating for one as lively and creative and independent as Bill, he continued to express gratitude even for the smallest of actions. I learned so many things from Bill that I could talk about for hours. One of them is I learned how to draw a circle. I have to say, I think we all know how to draw a circle, but I never really knew how to draw like a pretty perfect circle until I watched Bill do it time and time again. So anyway, Bill, thank you. I use it all the time. But I think the most important lesson I learned was the grace with which he carried himself in so many situations. I once heard the country music singer Garth Brooks say, "Graceful on the way up, graceful on the way down." In all the time Bill and I had conversations about music, it never ever touched upon country music, ever. I don't think he liked it. I definitely didn't really like it either. And but he and Garth Brooks had this connection, this one thing that they shared in common. I just turned 60 about a month ago, and I'm really committing right now to remembering to emulate Bill as I get older. His gratitude for life and his grace and appreciation for those around him. I miss you, Bill. I miss you all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. Laura, would you like to say a few words, Laura Cameron?
Yes. My goodness. Of course, I had to follow Karen and Chris. You guys have kind of been my partners in crime, and then most recently Stephen as well. These last few years, we, as Chris has said before, we like to call ourselves the Katavolos village. And I'm just so very proud to be a part of that. But my story perhaps is a little different than many of yours, because I did not meet Bill in an academic situation. I met Bill and his wife Terania much later in their lives when they had moved to Key West. We were neighbors down there. And I first knew Bill to be the guy who walked his dog.
Thank you, with ice.
Walked his dog Bravo at sunset. And then he came home to savor a wonderful martini. If he was lucky enough, he would also be able to enjoy his favorite spaghetti meal, homemade, of course, by Terania. He was the guy who never missed a day to golf with his good friend Charlie, who was a retired general. He usually went 2 or 3 times a week. And of course, the best part of that day was always the adult beverage and camaraderie that came afterwards. And now I wonder if there was actually golf involved every time they went golfing. And then, of course, the rest of the time, he sat very quietly for hours on end in his favorite chair with notebook and pen in hand. But then I quickly realized that there was a lot more to Bill than met the eye. And Bill wasn't in Key West very often. I came to find out why, that he was still teaching and involved in projects at Pratt. I was truly amazed. When I asked him about his work, we would often end up at the kitchen sink, where Bill would demonstrate with a glass of water in hand, covered with a piece of saran wrap, as he described his projects. I could sit for hours and hear the stories.
Thank you.
Now, well, I have a little, goodness. But you know, Bill was so humble that he really didn't want to start talking about his legendary design work. And a lot of it I had to uncover on my own as I did internet searches on him. But when prompted, Bill would gladly reminisce and share stories. He was so happy about the Lifetime Achievement Award he received last fall. And he continued his work even through this last year when he physically couldn't get to Pratt. He had me doing research into things like carbon fiber, backyard gardening, and even astronomy and astrology. He truly was a brilliant speaker, thinker, and way ahead of his time. But he never spoke down, and his theories always left me with those light bulb moments I've heard many of you talk about. Recently, our good friend Bonaventure and Bill's caregiver this last year reminded me of this. She said that one of the most important things she learned from Bill is that it's never too late to learn. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the other life stories Bill shared, in addition to the work stories, many of which only came after some prodding. We'll have to leave the details for later because that could take days. But even just a quick list of a few of the adventures gave me a glimpse into his colorful, rich life. Did you know that he grew up being a good friend of Telly Savalas, aka Kojak? And when he was younger, he worked at Telly's family restaurant. And the story goes that Bill was a better worker than Telly. Bill always spoke of his dad letting him sit very quietly. If he promised to sit very quietly in a room, he could listen to some of the meetings and conversations that he had with none other than Albert Einstein. That story always blew me away. And of course, there are so many stories about adventures and conferences at Ram's Head Inn that most of you are probably familiar with. One of the funny stories that he always told was about 6 weeks into a 2-week furlough when he was in the Army, he realized he was AWOL. And rumor is that the situation was fixed with a plane load of scotch that got delivered to the right people. Bill always looked over his shoulder when telling this story, and he said, "I sure hope the statute of limitations is over." And one of my all-time favorite stories was when Bill was invited to a dinner at the White House. But instead of the dinner, he started wandering around the White House, and he escaped to the Lincoln bedroom, only to be found by Lady Bird Johnson, yes, Lady Bird, while he was underneath the bed trying to figure out how it was made. That's our Bill. And I will wrap it up by saying, recently while we were storytelling, he stated to me that he figured he was like that guy in the movie, you know, the one with the box of chocolates? Forrest Gump, I asked, and he proclaimed yes. The more I thought about it, he was right. He traveled organically through life, designing well ahead of his time, meeting an array of people so unbelievable that it just can't all be true, and gathering many good friends along the way, and somehow bringing them all together in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It's wonderful.
Can I jump in for a story?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe so.
It's George Schmidt.
Sure.
Okay, regarding Telly Savalas and Bill.
Yes.
They grew up together in Garden City. Bill's father was one of the original developers of Garden City. I had a student while I was teaching at Hofstra named Athena Savalas. That was Telly's niece. And she told me the following story, that Telly and Bill got together later in their lives and decided to go back to Garden City, where they'd grown up together, to find their houses and check out the neighborhood. So they got into Telly's big black car and drove out to Garden City and got lost. They had no idea where they were. So Telly said to Bill, I'll have a solution. He reached in the glove box and he got this little blue police light and he stuck it on the roof of his car. And within moments, a real police car pulled up with its lights on and angrily said, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And he opened the window and said, "Oh my God, it's Kojak." And Telly then explained that they were looking for their old house. So the cop said, "Follow me, I'll take you there."
That's wonderful.
End of story.
Thank you. That was lovely. I would now like to invite Turka Weimeister, a fellow industrial designer, to share a few words. Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'm here as an advocate of the industrial designer in Bill, and I think that is his actually his defining thing, and that he studied at Pratt during the heyday of the Costellos, Rowena, and Alexander, and I think that's where he learned about how everything was connected and how everything is three-dimensional. And when the Rowena Reed Costello Fund gave him the award, I think in 2012, he made his speech using wooden blocks and demonstrating his theories with in 3 dimensions. And so I just, I'm just going to make this quick, but I think that he, the way he thought is the way industrial designers think about everything. We're all, industrial designers are really like Renaissance people who are interested in everything. And that's what Bill was. Thanks.
Thank you. That was lovely, Tucker. Frances Houseband, former Dean of the School of Architecture. Would you like to say?
Thank you. Thank you. I would have to say that Bill was for me an enormous inspiration and a support when I was the Dean of the Architecture School. I came to the school about 28 years ago, and it was a moment of tremendous transition and anxiety. Jerry Pratt had just stepped down after a long tenure as president. Warren Ilchman had come in and discovered that there was an enormous budget deficit. The faculty were extremely anxious, and I was extremely anxious too, because I was only the second woman that had ever been the dean of an architecture school anywhere, and I had really no idea what to expect. At faculty meetings, I would propose changes to the curriculum and moving from hot desks to real studios and shifting the schedule, and I would be greeted with dismay. And then Bill would stand up from the back of the room and he would say, "There are so few moments for real change in the world, and this is a moment, and we all have to go with it. This is a moment to say yes to change." He was the oldest person in the room, but as many of you have already noted, he was also the youngest person in the room. He was certainly the youngest faculty member, always ready to listen to a new idea. And gradually, other young faculty members, many of them half his age, would rally to the cause and things would begin to change. And eventually, the students actually got desks and studios. It was also a pleasure to go and visit Bill's studio in the engineering building and look at what he was doing and what Haresh was doing, another source of inspiration. You've all used the word magical, and I think I'd like to use that word too. It was like being in a magical garden of geometry when you went to visit Bill. And I never realized it then, but I was witnessing the birth of the Center of Experimental Structures. I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about, was it just, would we all be as inspired by change and open to new ideas when we got to be Bill's age? Or was it just a generational thing? Was that the generation that was capable of change? Or was it just Bill? I think now, in the wisdom of my own extended years, I think it was the genius of Bill. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Frances. That was lovely. And I'd like to hand over to my predecessor and another Dean of the School of Architecture, Tom Hanrahan. Welcome, Tom. You may be on mute, Tom.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Harriet. Thank you, Francis, everybody else who supported Bill, touched Bill over the years. It's kind of looking at the screen, it's kind of a who's who of just incredible people. Haresh, Bruce, Francis just spoke, Deborah, Steve. I wanted to just give a special shout out to Chris Arabadjes, amazing support. I still recall that subway ride when about a year ago by accident, where you described all the things you were doing for Bill, and that's really, really great. Really, really appreciate it. Yeah, he was. I can't add too much other than a couple of my personal reflections and just what an incredible person he was. He did, I think, for me personally, define Pratt because he completely lacked any professional definition. I mean, he was, a product designer, interior designer, furniture designer, architect, researcher, scientist, sociologist, politician, and of course, a golfer, as has been mentioned. So we did talk about that quite a bit. And what was, so interesting and different about him was that he connected, for me, he was a kind of futurist, but he also connected to a kind of way of thinking that came out of what I had mentioned to some other people, a kind of heroic past where I think Haresh used the word magic, where somehow in one fell swoop, one magic stroke of a pen, you could create an invention that could, solve the climate crisis, fix the economy, change society, change design itself. And of course, that was his water architecture, which was really, kind of amazing. The more I learned about it through all the various kinds of things. Of course, I would visit him in his lab. We gave him a couple of lectures, and we had a wonderful symposium. But the best things were, of course, as I think other people have mentioned, this amazing ability to just plunk down unannounced in a chair in my office and just say, "How you doing?" And it would suddenly, 2 hours would go by, and it was amazing, everything from, the future of the world to his golf game and back. And that was, another one of his many great gifts. It just his warmth and his kind of capacity to engage people and ideas, it just never stopped. It never stopped flowing. And I guess that's how I like to think of him now. He's somewhere not stopping. He's still going, and he's just, a kind of model for us all in that sense. Just keep going, Bill. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. That was lovely and profoundly animated as your background threatened to consume you on multiple occasions, and really peculiar sound effects. I think Bill would have been very proud about the semi-performative aspects of your...
Right. My screensaver.
Yeah, it was brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'd now like to hand over to yet another esteemed Pratt alum, Evan Douglas, who is himself now a Dean of Architecture. Over to you, Evan.
Well, it's an honor to be here. As Tom mentioned, many of my former colleagues, people I spent a lot of time with during my time at Pratt, and I have enormous respect for, are attending this event tonight. And it, to pick up something Francis said, it truly is a celebration. There are those that pass away early, and it's deeply unfortunate. He lived an extraordinary life. Let's be reminded of that. And often with brilliant individuals who, in a way, they see something that the rest of us don't. They often have great difficulty allowing others to come in, and in some cases, they unfortunately, consciously or unconsciously, they talk down to others. That wasn't Bill. On the contrary, a deeply, deeply honorable man, a gentleman, and someone with the most beautiful mind. All of us can or should be aspiring to the fact that as our bodies fall away and we get older, what we want to do is remain young in spirit, remain young in the context of reimagining the world, remain young as an educator to inspire each and every generation that walks into our classroom. And again, that was Bill. He was so playful. He was so playful. I rarely use this term, I suppose in the spirit of magic. I think of Bill as a kind of architectural shaman, a kind of beautiful mystic, although, you know, he certainly, his expertise was in math and science and design in a whole range of interdisciplinary areas. The fact is, he felt the world and he saw something that very few people have access to. And he brought it back every day and every semester and throughout his life to share it with his colleagues and his students. And he rained upon all of us the promise of a new world. You know, it's interesting because the first encounter I had with Bill wasn't in person. It's kind of beautiful. The manifesto, 20th Century Manifesto, Programs and Manifesto book that was published in, I don't know, the early 70s, among Kiesler and Fuller and Korb and Loos. And I mean, you can go on. There was Bill Katavolos. There was a young man who staked out an intellectual and creative thesis, and he put it into writing, and it was acknowledged by the avant-garde, and certainly by those who curate history. And it was not only kind of visionary and timeless, but certainly it's something you can return to today, and it's still fresh. Just a quick couple of other comments. I started at Pratt in the summer program. In fact, Dan was kind enough to bring me in. I was teaching at Columbia University in Cooper, and I met, I think within the first couple of weeks, Bill, and he kind of blew me away. I had, you know, fortunately, I was around people in my career that could read architecture on a deep level, and Bill was extraordinary. And I brought him up to reviews at Columbia University during the paperless studio era. Tom was up there as well, and he was, you know, eccentric is a complicated term. You can't so easily categorize someone, and because you can't, you may assume they're odd and a little different. Well, that was his power. I mean, he was not part of a trend. It wasn't about falling in line. There was no political correctness with Bill. I mean, my goodness, we could spend an entire evening revisiting some of the things he said that were enormously provocative. But they shook the ground that we stood on, and people turned around. I mean, I remember he didn't come to Columbia University too often, but when he did, there was a buzz around the building, Avery, that Bill was in the house. And then I move over in the early 2000, fortunately, and it's a really important part of my career. Was appointed the chair of the School of Architecture, and Bill and Haresh were these, you know, two of the most brilliant people I know, eccentric outliers. I'm going to exaggerate a bit. They lived below grade in this kind of extraordinary subterranean space. And as cited before, they were looking at some extraordinary questions in the universe. And most importantly, I would argue, and Haresh is in this space too, Bill was pursuing a planetary research. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, how do you put him in a design studio where he only oversees 12 to 15 students when you can unleash him in his private space and he can try to solve problems dealing with time and space, metaphysics. And I think he was protected by the administrative leadership. Tom was extremely generous, and I'm sure the former administration felt the same way. There was an exception made for good reason, because he needed the time alone to invent, and we had to give him the flexibility to be able to decide when it was important to come out and share it with the rest of the world. I'm sure many of us can agree to this, that as we get older, we reflect upon our lives and the people that we've met. And I feel deeply blessed, as all of you do, with knowing Bill Katavolos. And I feel grateful that I was able to pass through the same time and era that he was here on the planet. And what a beautiful human being, and his influence will sustain and continue to influence students and faculty and creative minds around the world for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. It's lovely. Just mindful of time for the remaining speakers. If we can keep close to time, that would be very helpful. Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome Deborah Gans, esteemed colleague and avant-garde researcher in the School of Architecture. Thought you'd appreciate that intro, Deborah, to say a few words.
Am I taking Erica's place? Was she?
Yeah, she would like to listen this evening.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah.
of course. That's lovely. I just didn't want to go in the wrong order. So for the next 3 minutes, I'm going to let Bill talk for himself. I had the joy and pleasure of interviewing Bill several times, once for BOM. It's still, that interview is still online, and once for the organic approach, which is a book that Zara Kutz and I produced, that Haresh is in as well. And so I've made out of these eaves Bill talking, I've clipped some things and threaded them together. I can't tell you exactly why I picked what I picked, but it seemed, some of these things seem to speak to our moment, political and ethical and all kinds of moments. And of course, some of it's a little risky because I think, as been alluded to, I think Bill would kill me if I hadn't put some of that stuff in there. So I didn't take the most vibrant passages. Anyway, so here goes. Here's a little bit of Bill. After 9/11, I was asked to give a talk on the question, is security the next aesthetic in architecture? I say, yes, it is. But security is not a capitulation to fear. It is not an atomic shelter in your basement. It's simply having access to an environment that you completely understand. The way things are now, you've lost contact. You don't know how your air conditioner or your computer or anything else works. It's like we're living in a black box inside of a bunch of black boxes. Liquid architecture would expose everything. You would know how you're cooling yourself, how you generate electricity. There's a great sense of security in that. And then I prompt him. You would have this fabulous combination of being totally enclosed and yet totally exposed. And he says, exposed in a new way. The male glare is everywhere. It is in the way of love. The women you know, Julia, Kristeva, and the rest, are far more interesting than the men. Lacan and Derrida, for instance, who are apologists for a failure of France after World War II. Unlike the green moment, organicism begins from within. I got into water early, but I've never liked swimming. I don't like to be on the surface of water. It's very disturbing to me. Whenever I see a sailing ship, I see it as a razor cutting an eye, the old Buñuel thing. When you're in water, it's gorgeous once you penetrate. Liquid architecture is really Greek classical architecture carried to its ultimate conclusion. In classical architecture, the male Doric separates the stylobate from its architecture. The female Corinthian connects the two. It's a conduit, a liquid jet of stone that bursts out of the stylobate and splashes under the architrave. The Ionic is the heteromorphic knot that binds them. It was left to me to work on the fourth order, the hermaphoromorphic column. In the Gothic cathedral, on the other hand, when light passes through the stained glass, it generates without puncture and illuminates without opening. Debussy's engulfed cathedral, the Sunken Cathedral, had an enormous effect on me as a child, the concept of a sunken cathedral. And then I prompt him. According to myth, doesn't it sink into the sea each day at sunset because of our sins and rise again at sunrise? So you really envision this total immersion and then rising into the house. Absolutely. I have a fear of staircases. I think they're the most dangerous architectural invention. Ramps are all right, but I would prefer to be raised through water. Hallelujah, Bill.
Deborah, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Theo, maybe you can fill us in a bit more on the hermaphoromorphic. But if not, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. That was I was greatly honored when I was asked by Haresh to write the nominating letter for the 2019 Alumni Life Achievement Award, which of course we all know Bill received. And I would like to share with you the contents of that letter. Dear colleagues, your identifying of quote unquote contribution to community as an overriding theme for this year's Alumni Achievement Awards prompts me to comment as follows about William Katavolos, who I am proud to nominate for this year's award, and his work. To the point, Bill has been from the very beginning of his life as a designer and teacher, and continues to be, about innovation and the future, developing new habitable space and architectural form-making technologies centered around water as a structural system that can lead us to conceive and realize a community of spaces, and by extension, communities as never before imagined, such as his, quote, city of liquid villas, unquote. I cannot but think of Leonardo da Vinci and his inquisitive drawings of water. His lectures at Pratt, most significantly those within his School of Architecture Futures seminar, were startlingly memorable, if not revolutionary, and sometimes controversial in content and impact. Also, there is no need for me to comment here upon his highly acclaimed industrial and furniture designs that are part of our 20th century design legacy. We are now seeing at Pratt, through its new leadership and many of its faculty, the advent of interdisciplinary learning and creativity. Well, Bill Katavolos has not only embraced this, but has practiced it throughout his long career. He is deeply interested in mathematics, physics, nanotechnology, organicism, even classicism, and one could go on. He exemplifies as an alumnus that which we strive to achieve today and in the future. He cannot, as a highly distinguished teacher and design professional, and who has erased creative borders, be easily characterized. Bill Katavolos resides in the future of Pratt. His creative intellect transcends the multiple disciplines that define the Institute while engaging them in proposing future possibilities for dwelling. He is an extraordinarily unique and pioneering alumnus with a continuing active presence that continues to sustain the prestige of the entire Institute. He is most worthy of this long overdue alumni recognition. With collegial respect, Bill used to greet me at Higgins in Greek. So I would like to say goodbye to him in Greek. Eoniasu imnimi, agapitemas, which translates means, may your memory be eternal, our beloved. Thank you.
Theo, that was lovely. Beloved indeed. John LaBelle, would you like to say a few words?
So in 1962, Bill lectured at my school at Penn. A lecture would be totally prescient today. I mean, wouldn't it be great to have a recording of that? He was the first person I encountered who thought and presented laterally. 8 years later, when I found out he was in New York, I brought him to teach in architecture at Pratt, where he spent the rest of his career. There's no way to encapsulate Bill's thinking, except maybe to compare it to McLuhan's or Carpenter's or Aaron Zweig's or Bacon's. I wrote about Bill's 270-mile-high building for the Village Voice, and I sat in on his and taped his course for a book I never wrote. I was influenced by Bill, and he read my book cover to cover. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, John. Ron, Professor Ron Schiffman, I believe you're amongst us.
Thank you. Haresh called Bill a magical genius. I concur with that. I also think he was a transdisciplinary man. He went beyond being interdisciplinary to a new state, I think, in terms of the way he thought. I met Bill at the point in time that he was moving from bridging the School of Art and Design and the School of Architecture. And at that point in time, the political and social situation that was embracing academia, that was taking place in our cities, was very, very tense. It was very much akin to today. There was a social and a political turmoil going on. There was a period of racial reckoning that was being addressed by universities and in our cities. We were at the Pratt Center, and in the classes I taught, engaged with communities, and many in the School of Architecture and the School of Design were disdainful of what we were doing. They basically said that this was social work, it wasn't architecture, it wasn't design. Here, I met him, introduced by Stanley Salzman, who was a colleague at that time, and Bill Brieger. And Bill embraced us. He stood with us. He understood that what we were doing, this idea of working, of developing a participatory processes in design that involve the client in a democratic sense, not only in the autocratic individuals who would be our traditional clients. Bill understood that and really embraced that and gave credence to a lot of the work that we did, both at the center and in the School of Architecture. And I think that helped us gain a foothold at the Institute that we would not have had without Bill. We met many times, sometimes with Stan Salzman at Chino's, and had lunch, extended lunches that I really miss, discussing a number of issues, everything from design to the political turmoil and the political solutions to some of those endeavors. We also talked about his time at Ram's Head Inn, where his father worked in the kitchen, and where my two of my three kids were married. And so we shared that one beautiful place. And just parenthetically, that's a place that Einstein did visit, and as part of the work that was done on dealing with the atomic, the discovery of the atomic bomb. He stood tall in the School of Architecture. Bill was a beautiful, creative, and caring man. I love the moments that we met. He greeted you not only with words, but with a hug and a kiss, and something I really treasured every time I met with him. And I lament that we didn't see each other more. Yeah. And someday maybe we'll have lunch together again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Let's hope so. That'd be lovely.
Not scheduled.
Dan,
Say something?
oh, sorry, hello.
Hi, this is Harvey Bernstein. I'm not scheduled to speak, but could I say something?
Okay, if you can keep it to a
Thank you.
minute, that would be.
I first
lovely.
met Bill. My first teaching job was at Parsons, and Bill ran the small industrial design department there. I didn't know him, but one day in the men's room, somebody was taking a shave, and I said, "Who are you?" He says, "Well, I have the 6 walls today." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, it's my turn to turn the 6 walls in our studio into scan," which were drawings about the assignment that he had. So of course I started auditing his course. And Bill and I used to both go to Fire Island on the weekends, and Bill always had file folders with him. And we talked so much, I always wished that the ferry would run into fog and would kind of stop and we just keep talking. He was just so wonderful. I would actually sometimes just wait for ask him what ferry he was going to take so I would be on it because he was such a delight. The last time I spoke to Phil, he was with Karen walking through the ID department, and all the work in the hallway was my students' work. And he looked at me and said, "Do they understand scale?" And we both laughed. It was a wonderful moment. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lukey. That's lovely. And for anyone else who actually would like to share thoughts, please do use the chat. We will be capturing the chat and sharing it with everyone as well. So don't feel, if you've not been given an opportunity to speak, we would still love to have your thoughts. Dan, over to you. Welcome back, having just retired. It's lovely to see you again.
Be brief and personal. I may repeat what has been said. In the 80s and 90s at Pratt, Bill Katavolos was the most interesting, older colleague with whom I could talk about everything. Bill, as you know, and it has been said, was a great storyteller. He told stories about being young in New York in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Bill helped me to fall in love with Pratt and its history. Bill was, for me, one of the heroic modernists, all of whom had a manifesto. That has been said. He was the ultimate optimist. And the word optimist was kind of, I think that if you do a word count, you might find the word optimist covering a lot of what has been said. And it's interesting, utopian dreamer. By the way, I think that right now, there are few utopian dreamers these days because we're living in a dystopian moment, but be that as it may. Bill was searching for the perfect number that unifies all knowledge. He was, as has been said already, interdisciplinary before the word became fashionable. Had he lived to watch this election, he would have predicted Biden's victory, smiling, playing with his calculator, using the numbers of the votes at that particular moment. A few of us met with Bill in the fall of 1999 to discuss the big issues at the end of the millennium. We sat and listened to Bill for 3 hours, never bored. Peter Ernie and John Vakos, 2 of Bill's favorite students, were part of the group. Bill was very generous with his time outside the school. He was, for me, and I think people have said that as well, a role model of how to grow old and remain useful and curious. He will be greatly missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That was lovely. Ajmal, I believe you're here. Ajmal Akhtash, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for letting me share a few thoughts to honor Bill. I'll be brief. Hopefully I can share some stories here, but my story starts back, I want to say in the fall of 1998. I was a young second-year architecture student starting at Pratt, and I was in my studio working on a Tuesday afternoon, and in walks Richard Sirach into the studio, as excited as one can be, talking about a lecture he had just attended given by Katavolos. The contents of that conversation is not exactly clear to me as my memory has slipped, but what was clear is that I needed to sign up for Bill's courses. And at the time, I think it was Architectonics and Architecture Futures. And so I was able to sign up the following semester for one of those courses and subsequently the second after that. But I was just as excited about the conversations that took place in that course. The courses were set up as a kind of roundtable discussion about politics, history, culture, material science, and technology, all of which I believe now were staged to kind of assist me in understanding how I can tap into the future. Looking back, I think Bill's courses promoted very much an entrepreneurial way of thinking. Many of the design proposals shared in Bill's courses and the students were driven by sustainable design agendas. And I think, you know, either one of those, or rather those ideas could be scaled in industrial design or architecture. So it was very fluid between the two. I personally have produced over the last few years dozens of pitch decks, but looking back, I think that project presentation for his courses were my first lessons in developing a pitch deck. I think the following years I would work at the center with Bill and Haresh. I was able to also convince Richard to join us. And so we spent a lot of time down at the basement, lower level of Higgins Hall, working, discussing the future with Bill. Bill was very generous with his time, as many of you have stated. He had a tremendous understanding of fluids, both within his projects as well as the relationships and interactions with people. I think he was very easy to speak with. He would lean back on his chair and just really get comfortable and talk for hours. And I think for me, over those 2 decades of knowing and working with Bill, each conversation was just as important as the previous or the next one we were having. And he kept it entertaining at all times. And he was definitely probably the last of the martini gentlemen still alive. And I'm aware that I think the time I spent with Bill was a unique opportunity. I think it was made possible by the generous support of the Institute. I think the creation of the Center for Experimental Structures by Bill and Haresh opened up a wide range of opportunities for me personally, impacting me greatly even today. So in some ways, I'm still plugged into that kind of organic approach as I develop tech for myself. I think I will always be grateful for the time I spent with Bill. But I think specifically, I'm also grateful. And I also want to kind of take a moment to thank the many people who made it possible and supported Bill. I think Haresh Lavani, Tom Hanrand, Evan Douglas, Eric Hendricks, Jason Lee, John LaBelle, and Bruce Cohen, to name many. I think these people recognized Bill needed the support, the continued support, however possible. I think that support may have transformed over the years, and it took on all kinds of forms and shapes, but what was consistent, I think for me, was Bill's drive to continue with his work. I think that the last few years were difficult for me when I was visiting Bill at the hospital. We would spend a few minutes always catching up when I would see him, and he would enjoy a cheeseburger. He would always remind me that I would need to bring a cheeseburger. But what was immediately clear after we caught up was that he would pull out his notepad and ask for a soft tip marker, which I never forgot, and he just began to work. And I think I like to remember Bill that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ajmal. Richard Srock, would you like to say a few words, please?
Yes, thank you, and pleasure seeing a lot of familiar faces. And I'm gonna jump right into this. I was Bill's research assistant in the late 90s, and it touches into some of the conversation Ajmal was beginning to pick up. And so fast forward slightly after that, when we were getting the Digital Futures Group off the ground, Dean Hannerhand asked us to move from the penthouse of Higgins Hall down into the basement and share an office space with him. And this really gave us a lot of Bill time. And I think that a lot of that has really shaped the thinking and the way that we're in turn operating. But I want to share a more recent story. And it really ties into about 2 years ago. And Bill's in the assisted living center. And, I wanted to have dinner and drinks. And so the plan was cheeseburger, fries, and beers, and just chat. So I'm in a car on my way over to the senior center, and there's a bit of a traffic jam before we get there. And there's ambulances in front. And I'm just thinking to myself, this probably happens quite a bit here. And it's a little bit on the depressing side. So I get out of the car, I'm walking down the street, And as I get closer and closer, I see it's Bill, and Bill is being put into the ambulance. And I get there, and he looks at me. He's like, "Hey, what's going on?" He's like, "It's Tuesday," and I'm like, "Yeah, Bill, we were supposed to meet today." And he's like, "I'm like, what's going on with you?" And he's like, "Don't worry about it." He's like, "Come in here." And I look at the EMS guys, and they just like, "Yeah, you could do whatever you want." So I get down, and I sit there, and Bill's like half naked in here. And he's like, how you doing? What's going on? And I'm like, "Bill, wait. We're in an ambulance right now. What's going on with you?" And he looks down, and he's like, "Oh, this stuff's all clogged up. They need to blow this out and take care of it. I haven't urinated for a couple days." So I'm like, "Okay, so we're going to do a trip to the hospital." So we make a trip to Kingsbrook Jewish Medical Center. And it was a absolutely horrific scene. I don't know if anyone has spent much time there, but it was just absolute carnage everywhere. We were waiting in the emergency room, and it's like you're like in a line for a car wash. There were no rooms available. And over the course of that night, it was probably like 4 or 5 hours I spent with him. It was just a tremendous series of conversations. And a lot of you are touching on it here today. That was dealing with physics, design, education, culture, families. And, one of my only regrets there was like not being able to record and document this. But towards the end of the evening, he's looking at me, and he's got this infectious smile, and he's like, "Wait to see this." And I'm like, "What do you mean, wait till you see this? Like, we're in a hospital. Like, what's he gonna do, a magic trick?" And then I see what he's looking at, and there's this Russian woman walking towards us, and she has a big smile on her face. And I'm thinking like he knows her or something. And she comes up to him and grabs his hand, and she's like, "I just wanted to thank you. You have the most beautiful smile. It's radiating through this room, and you are bringing people joy by just being here." And he's like, "Oh, thank you. And she leaves, and I'm like, "Bill, did you know her?" And you're like, "No." And he's like, I don't want to know what they see in me. He's like, "None of this stuff works anymore, but I guess I still got it." And I think that at that particular moment, I mean, he was in a bit of a dire situation. It was not a fun environment whatsoever. But he always had this like smile of the trickster, of the Cheshire Cat, as if he knew something we didn't. And he was perpetually advocating for people to wake up and really participate in this thing called life. And, at the end, I'm so thankful that Pratt was an environment that allowed for us to have an intersection. Bill still speaks to me, and there's a stickiness to these stories and conversations that we had over the last couple decades. And he'll be missed greatly. But I'm glad that I had this experience, and I will try my best to have these things live on in multiple different ways into the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. That was lovely. Stephen Valentine, would you like to say a few words, Stephen? Are you on mute? It's one of those existential mysteries.
Unmute.
Next one. Okay, maybe there could be a
I'm
battle.
here now. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can. Welcome.
Okay. Somehow it got
Stephen.
muted.
No problem.
I prepared something, so I'm going to read it.
Lovely.
If Bill were cast in a movie role, he would easily secure the part as the mastermind villain in a Bond movie. Not as Dr. No, but as Dr. Know-It, as in Noasis, the arising of consciousness, knowledge, and wisdom. And his mission would be to first resign, then to reassign, and then redesign the entire world. Endo, ecto, meso, correlations and correlative thinking. The answer is always in the other. And that's what you would call the making of catabolism. And after that, the universe is never the same. Douglas MacArthur, Oppenheimer, Mies van der Rohe, even the Pope. He traveled in circles throughout historic moments in time, even more impressive than Forrest Gump. Over the years, we collaborated on a variety of projects focused mostly on hydronics. I invited Bill to South Texas a few years ago, for I found a site where he could finally build his lifelong vision of a hydronic village. During his visit, I organized a lecture and a reception for Bill. Now, if you're familiar with the Andy Griffin Show and the small town of Mayberry, you can imagine the makeup of that audience of about 70 people. He had such an impact with the local residents that Katavolos is still talked about to this day in the tiny town of Comfort. By chance, my dad was visiting Texas at the same time as Bill. I sometimes imagined, but never thought, that the two most influential men in my life would ever meet. Both from the greatest generation, each sharing their colorful stories, they became friends. And as recently as this past August, my dad and Bill spoke over the phone while my father was recovering from COVID-19 at age 98. In mid-September, I had a visit with Bill, and though he was bedridden, he was hyper articulate as ever, full of ideas. He had sketches along with his mathematics, scratch and paper laying on his bed, the bedside table, and drawings pinned up on the wall, along with one of his favorite paintings. The Bill we all know, always full of optimism, he was ready to work on getting his strength back so he could return to Higgins Hall's basement to continue his research. He even asked me, Steve, I gotta go to Macy's with you and you gotta get some clothes for me. That's how determined he was. There's no one person who has had such an impact on who I am as an architect today than Bill. I'm forever grateful for his friendship, for his shared with me the delights of life. He has engraved a permanent mark for his once quoted by his hero Buckminster Fuller, to live life without a splinter in one's eye is to live life without being able to really see. To you, Mr. Katavolos, you are one of a kind, a gentleman genius. Keep on romancing the world in that Katavoloso super paradise world. Thanks for it all, Bill.
Thank you, Stephen. That was lovely. John Sweeney, I believe you're here.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Did your video work?
Well, I suppose I can try.
That would be lovely. Thank you. Do you have a light?
A little dark over there.
Don't mean to ask too much, but
How's that?
oh, there we go. Thank you.
Okay. There's not a whole lot I could add to everything that's said. Starting from the beginning for me, I got to know Bill as an undergrad in the architecture department, and he was my thesis advisor. And we spent a lot of time drawing and talking about water architecture. And when I chose to pursue that further as a graduate student, ironically, the architecture department turned my thesis down. But Bill told me to go talk to Bruce Hanna, who said, as long as you're doing it with Bill, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Go ahead. So thank you, Bruce. So along with my time studying with Bill formally, I had about a 3-year weekly golf game with him. And I had an opportunity to drive through the Southwest with him on a lecture series. So I spent a lot of quality time with him. He taught me about design. He taught me about golf. He taught me how to make a good martini. He taught me a lot about humanity because, as everyone's touched on, Bill's humanity was deep and forceful and gentle, actually. One of the things Bill told me a number of times, I can't count how many times, was that he was more afraid of success than he was of failure. And I've come to find through my career that really for someone that thinks like Bill, there's really no distinction between the two.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, John. Ariana, would you like to be the final speaker this evening?
Hi, yes, thank you. So I worked with Bill starting in 2016 as his research assistant. Bill was a true inspiration to me, and I feel extremely grateful to have been able to learn from him and spend so much time with him. When I met Bill, I was very uncertain about my future and my past. He always had a story or a life lesson to tell and helped shape me as a designer. Immediately, we both knew we had a special connection and that we understood each other. We both grew up on Long Island. Our childhood homes were only 15 minutes away from each other. And he seemed to know certain things about me without me even having to say. He always spoke about how much he loved trees and would climb or hug a tree whenever he saw one. I've made sure to hug as many trees as I can and will keep hugging them to let them know that Bill's still here for them. I'm exceptionally proud of the great work we were able to get done, from the autonomous house to the Parthenon to even secretly studying how to grow marijuana because he wanted his design to be able to make a profit for the occupants. Even after he entered the hospital in late 2018, we spent so much time together. Every week of those last 6 months where I worked with him, I would show up to his hospital room with one of his favorite foods, either a cheeseburger, no vegetables, extra ketchup from Clinton Park Cafe, or 2 plain slices of pizza from Luigi's. We spent time documenting some of his stories, working through his sketches, and just spending time together. Bill had an incredible mind that never stopped turning, no matter what time of the day it was, no matter how sick or tired he may have felt. He never stopped looking toward the future, never faltering in his belief that there would be a better tomorrow. I feel so privileged to have been able to learn from one of the greatest minds this world has known, and that he gifted me with a copy of his manifesto. I know that I'll be thinking of Bill and what his input might be on every project I touch. I can only hope that his legacy and his great ideas will live on through the ongoing research at the morphology department. I also just want to say a quick thank you to Haresh and Chris for guiding me through my time with Bill and giving me the opportunity that led to me meeting and learning from Bill. And of course, thank you to Bill.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely conclusion. And before we finish, I just want to say to thank all of you really for coming this evening and to just reflect on some of the things that have been said. And I suppose, you know, to quote Bill, he once said form follows function. That was one of his main revelations. And tonight I feel like we've witnessed a kind of swarm follows affection, because as someone who didn't know him very well, I certainly didn't know him very well, and maybe one or two of you in the same position as me, it's wonderful to really get a glimpse into the infinitude, I suppose, of a true inventor, a pioneer, and a playful polymath, whose humor, it would seem, is as substantial as his humility, and his intensity as strong as his insight, but also his field of intellectual vision as wide and intense as his ability to focus on these profound ideas that he had. So really, this is, all of you this evening have been part of a very important message to Bill. In a way, a little note that he finds in his pocket on your journey. And I can imagine him right now in a rocket rather than a Brooklyn ambulance with Richard as his sidekick. But they're serving in-flight cheeseburgers, and the rocket is fueled with all of the love and admiration and awe and gratitude that all of you have shared this evening. So really, it's wonderful for all of you to have this time to share with everybody else your experiences. But I think this is just the very beginning of an extensive catalogue of his many accomplishments, and I hope will help us in making sure that we do put this together as some lasting tribute to his work and his life. So thank you all for coming, and we will of course share the recording with you and the information in the chat, and it was lovely to host you all. So thank you again. To Bill.
You're here. Thank
Cheers.
you.
Cheers to Bill.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
Bill. Cheers,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank
Cheers
you.
to all.
Thank you.
Be well. Thank you. Cheers
Thank
to
you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
You.
Thank you.
Lucia. Thanks again for Sam.
Yes, thank you again, Fazam. Really good job.
And Harriet.
Yes, thank you, Harriet.
Night.
No, it wasn't my hard work. Definitely Anita and Fazam and Chris and others.
Your voice is marvelous, and it really, I think it helped everyone to.
Oh, thank you. No, it was really, it's very moving, honestly. I'm really glad we did this evening. Thank you all. It's really, really good.
Okay, night.
Yeah, good night. Nice to meet you, Karen. Thank you. See you, Chris. See you on campus one day.
Okay, I hope so, Harriet.
Yeah.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you again. Great words. It's
See you,
lovely.
Laura.
Thank you.
See you, Sarah. Bye, Brent.
Nice to see you.